We are the Justice League. I'm Mysonne.
I'm Tamika.
My name's Carmen Perez. And we are going to be marching from New York City to DC April 13th to deliver a justice package called
The Justice Package.
yeah.
Why is it called March to Justice?
Well, we call it March to Justice because the journey from New York to Washington, there's a few things happening. We're registering voters, which is a major part of justice, making sure that people are educated and engaged in the political process. But when we get to Washington, D.C., we are going to be going in and meeting with members of Congress who have not signed on to 3 specific bills that are necessary or that we feel are necessary in order to invest in our communities and deal with some of the police accountability issues that we see happening across the country. And one of the main things about justice is where do our young people stand and how do we get them into the conversation and allow their voices to be heard? So while some young people think that there's a disconnect between the movement and politics, at the end of the day, all the things that we see happening to us can be addressed by us being a part of the political process. So that's what we'll be doing on the road for 8 days.
Okay, so you're actually walking from New York to DC by foot?
We are. We're going to be stepping off in Staten Island. For us, that's symbolic. That's where Eric Garner was from, and that's where he was killed. And then we're going to be marching through 5 different states, stopping in key cities. So the first night, we're going to be in Newark. The second night, we'll be in Trenton. We'll hit Philly the third night to support some of our partners, the Fight for 15, which are the fast food workers. And then we'll be in Baltimore. By the weekend, we'll be in DC. We'll host some rallies. And then on the 21st, we'll be having a rally and some performances at the National Mall. But the following day, on the 22nd, we'll be suiting up so that we could have informational sessions with Congress so that we could bring light to the 3 bills that we are proposing.
Now, Mysonne, how did you get involved in all this?
Well, you know me. I'm always an advocate for justice and equality and all that things of that nature. I met Carmen through Tamika, who was doing PR work for me, and she had invited me to do the gathering lockdown, and we went into the detention centers for the youth, and we were talking to them, and we were educating them within music and writing and different skills. And during that process is when the whole Eric Garner situation happened. So we started to mobilize in the streets, and then it just took on a whole life of its own. And then a bunch of people came together, and we're here.
You know, I was talking to Scarface a few weeks ago, and he was saying that it feels like we're back in the 60s again in terms of, you know, the riots and the shootings and the marches and the protests and kind of the state of the country. I mean, would you agree?
I would pretty much say I would have to agree to a certain extent. I just think that our fight is different because now we're fighting with people who think they are free. We're fighting. Before in the 60s, we understood that there was racism, that there was classism, that there was discrimination. I think at this point, the youth here and even a lot of the older people are so content and comfortable within what they have that they don't realize that we are being discriminated against, that we are at war, that we are being targeted. So when you're trying to change the mindset of people who don't realize that they're not free, in contrary to when back in the 60s, everyone knew there was direct discrimination, there was segregation, there was the black only, white only, and people understood that it was wrong. Yeah. I just think at this point now, a lot of people don't really realize the fight. So we have to educate each other, and we have to show, you have to see people getting shot in the back by white officers, or, you know, we have to see that people are not being even indicted on crimes for killing innocent people with no weapons. We have to show these things. Like, you have to see a man getting choked on camera for us to really say, damn, this is really what's going on. Right. You know, so I think in terms of that, it's different, but now it's definitely the same fight. We just have to take it to another level.
Yeah, and Harriet Tubman said that she could have freed more people if they knew they were slaves.
Right, and I think just to add to what Mysonne and Tamika are saying is, you know, I think racism is disguised. It has a new face, right? And so a lot of these institutions that we're trying to fight against have obviously put people of color in place to kind of do their work.
Right.
And so we see police officers that look like us. We see
politicians.
You know, politicians that look like us, but the system's still the same, and it's still racist, and it's set up to oppress people, specifically people of color.
Now, what did you think about the incident that just happened in South Carolina, where the black guy got shot in the back, you know, by a police officer? I believe like they try to plant evidence or something like that. I don't know the exact story around what happened afterwards.
Right. Well, what they say is that the taser that we think we see in the video was being placed next to the body, which is, you know, clearly all police officers are trained that they are supposed to leave evidence exactly where it's located in the time of, you know, the crime or whatever has taken place. And so what we saw there was just an example of what goes on all over the country. People, every 28 hours, someone is killed by a police officer, and a lot of times it's people of color and they are unarmed victims. But just because some courageous person was there to take a video of it, do we know what happened? But it's going on all over the country. You know, it was a long time before you knew exactly what happened with Mike Brown. And if it had not been for the fact that his body was laying out on the ground, we wouldn't have known anything, because there's no video of exactly what transpired between him and the police officer. The same thing with Eric Garner. And that's what has people so emotional about it, because they're seeing the bodies dropping and the body being laid on the ground. Walter Scott was clearly dead, and this police officer still handcuffed him and was yelling at him to put your hands behind your back after he had been shot 8 times. So this is something that is coming to life because you're seeing it on the TV screen. But again, it's happening all over. Now, the reality is that just because you got an indictment does not mean you're going to get a conviction. In the Amadou Diallo shooting, where that man was shot 41 times for raising up what they believe was a gun, but it was later on that it was a wallet. That's what we found out. You know, in that case, the officers were indicted, but they still did not do any time. The same thing happened in the Sean Bell case, which really started getting younger people to be active, and particularly me, where he was shot and killed in his car along with Joe Guzman and Trent Benefield. Again, no camera there. The officers were indicted, but they were not convicted. And so we don't know what will happen in this case and what type of trick bags they'll put together to get this cop off.
And to just, you know, I also want to kind of take it back a little bit. You know, I did see the press conference yesterday. I believe it was yesterday. It was early in the morning. It was whenever you posted. But I was thinking about the family. And I remember, you know, very different situation. But I remember the knock on the door at 4 in the morning telling me my sister had passed away. And I was thinking about how there was no answers. There's a lot of things that my family was going through, and just the trauma, the pain. And I was watching the family and their pain, because they were initially told that their son had a confrontation with police and therefore he was dead. Right? And it wasn't until this video popped up that then completely flipped the narrative and has allowed us to see something very different. And like Tamika saying, this is happening all over the country. But at the end of the day, I just want to stop and think about the family, the families that have been impacted by this issue, the families that are constantly trying to seek justice for their children, for their brothers, for their fathers, and have not yet received that justice. And so for us, the reason why we're marching from New York City to DC is to elevate those voices, is to bring to Congress these 3 pieces of federal legislation and to really hold them accountable, because at the end of the day, there are still people dying on our streets. Every day, every 28 hours, every week, we're seeing a new case, and it's just unacceptable.
You know, did you guys see the Chris Rock post where he took pictures of himself getting pulled over by cops 3 times in, I guess, 7 weeks?
Right.
Yeah, I saw it. And I think, I think there's something to be said about Chris Rock in general and what he's been doing, using his platform. I wish that more artists would do the same, would talk about what's happening in the communities that they come from, because Chris Rock has been using his voice to elevate the Black Lives Matter movement, and not enough artists are doing that. Too many people are separating themselves from where they come from and from what's happening in their communities. And I think that what the Chris Rock video shows, or his post shows, is that they do not care about whether or not you are driving a special car, or if you have some record deal, or if you are on TV. All they care about is the fact that your skin is black, and therefore you are a target for racism and for profiling.
Right, and that's one of the bills. One of the bills is to end racial profiling. The first bill that we talk about is to stop the militarization of policing, and the third bill is to invest in our children and keep safe communities, which is a juvenile justice bill called the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act. And so it's aligned with the reason why we're marching, because today in America these issues still exist. Although we've won major civil liberties and civil rights from the 60s, we are still seeing that people are constantly being oppressed.
I'm trying to battle John Cena. Can somebody find John Cena's management, WWE, somebody find John Cena, and let's make this happen.
So let's be super honest here, and I'm gonna be really frank and a little uncouth. I'm not gonna suck a dick unless I'm gonna do it great. I'm not gonna write a book unless I'm gonna do it great. I'm not gonna cook a meal unless I'm not gonna touch anything unless I plan on doing it better than anyone else you've ever met in your entire life.